Transformation begins with renewing your mindset, not changing your environment, because your environment is only a mirror reflecting the condition of your thinking. Many people spend their lives trying to rearrange external conditions, believing that a new city, a new relationship, a new job, or new circumstances will automatically produce a new life. But the truth is, if the mind remains unchanged, the same patterns will repeat in a different place. A renewed environment without a renewed mindset only gives you a more comfortable version of the same limitations. Your mindset is the governing system of your life. It controls how you interpret experiences, how you respond to challenges, and how you see yourself. Two people can face the same situation, yet produce completely different outcomes, not because of their environment, but because of their thinking. One sees obstacles, the other sees opportunity. One sees impossibility, the other sees potential. The difference is not location, resources, or background. The difference is perspective. A renewed mindset requires intentional unlearning. Many beliefs you carry were never chosen by you. They were absorbed from family, culture, fear, and past failure. These beliefs operate silently, shaping decisions without permission. You cannot transform what you refuse to examine. Renewal begins when you question the assumptions that have governed your life for years. Why do you think the way you think about success, money, relationships, or your own worth? Until those questions are confronted, change remains superficial. Environment can influence you, but it cannot define you unless you allow it to. People who wait for perfect conditions before changing will never move forward. Growth does not require ideal circumstances. It requires a disciplined mind. When your mindset is strong, you can function in weak environments without becoming weak yourself. When your mindset is weak, even the best environment will eventually collapse around you. Renewing the mind is not about positive thinking alone. It is about accurate thinking. False positivity collapses under pressure, but truth-based thinking creates stability. When you understand who you are, why you exist, and what you are capable of, external chaos loses its power over you. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding intentionally. Reaction is a sign of an unmanaged mind. Response is the fruit of renewal. Your mindset determines what you tolerate. Many people stay in situations that drain them because their thinking has normalized dysfunction. Once the mind is renewed, tolerance changes. You stop accepting what violates your purpose. This internal shift forces external change naturally. You don't chase transformation. Transformation follows your thinking. Renewal also demands consistency. A single inspirational moment cannot compete with years of conditioned thought. The mind must be trained daily through discipline, reflection, and intentional input. What you listen to, what you read, what you meditate on all contribute to the architecture of your thinking. If you feed your mind fear, doubt will grow. If you feed it clarity and truth, confidence will develop. When the mindset changes, behavior changes without force. You no longer need external pressure to act differently because your internal alignment produces natural action. Discipline becomes easier, focus becomes clearer, and decisions become intentional. The struggle was never your lack of ability, it was misaligned thinking. True transformation feels uncomfortable at first because it challenges familiar patterns. The mind resists renewal because familiarity feels safe, even when it is destructive. Growth requires the courage to feel uncertain while forming new mental frameworks. That discomfort is evidence that change is happening internally before it becomes visible externally. Once the mindset is renewed, the environment becomes a tool rather than a trap. You no longer depend on conditions to motivate you. You create momentum from within. Opportunities that were once invisible become obvious. Doors that seemed closed reveal new entrances. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Purpose gives direction. Clarity turns potential into discipline, because without purpose, energy is scattered. And without clarity, even strong potential becomes wasted effort. Many people are active but not effective, busy but not productive, moving constantly but going nowhere meaningful. The reason is simple. Motion without direction creates exhaustion, not progress. When purpose is missing, every opportunity looks attractive, every distraction feels justified, and every path seems valid, which ultimately leads to confusion disguised as exploration. Purpose is not something you invent in a moment of inspiration. It is something you discover through alignment with what you are truly meant to contribute. It is the internal understanding of why you exist beyond survival, beyond comfort, and beyond approval. When purpose is unclear, life becomes reactive. You respond to circumstances instead of designing outcomes. But when purpose becomes clear, life becomes intentional, and every decision begins to serve a larger vision. Clarity is what organizes potential. Potential without clarity is like raw energy without direction. It has power but no structure. Many individuals underestimate how much talent is wasted simply because it lacks focus. You can have ability, intelligence, and opportunity, but without clarity, these strengths compete against each other instead of working together. Clarity does not give you more ability. It helps you use what you already have effectively. Discipline is not forced behavior. It is the natural outcome of clear direction. When you know exactly what matters, saying no becomes easier than saying yes. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction, but in reality, it is protection. It protects your time from distractions, your energy from waste, and your focus from fragmentation. Without clarity, discipline feels heavy. With clarity, discipline becomes logical. Purpose also filters your decisions. Every choice either aligns with your direction or pulls you away from it. People who lack purpose make emotional decisions. They choose based on temporary feelings, social pressure, or immediate gratification. But when purpose is established, decisions are evaluated through alignment. You begin to ask whether something contributes to your direction or delays it. That single shift changes the quality of your entire life. Clarity reduces internal conflict. One of the greatest sources of exhaustion is not physical labor, but mental confusion. When you are unsure about what you want, your mind constantly negotiates between options. This internal negotiation drains energy that could have been used for execution. Clarity ends that negotiation. It simplifies thinking. It removes unnecessary options and brings focus to what truly matters. Potential becomes powerful only when it is guided. A river without banks spreads into useless floodwater, but when directed, it becomes a source of life and energy. Human potential works the same way. You are not limited by what you can do. You are limited by what you are focused on doing. Clarity channels your abilities into a specific direction where results become measurable and progress becomes visible. Discipline grows stronger when it is tied to meaning. People struggle with consistency when their actions feel disconnected from purpose. But when actions are connected to a meaningful outcome, persistence becomes easier. You don't rely on motivation because clarity reminds you why you started. Motivation fluctuates, but purpose stabilizes behavior. Direct also eliminates comparison. When you lack clarity, you measure your life against others because you don't have your own defined path. Comparison becomes a distraction that steals peace and focus. But when purpose is clear, comparison loses relevance because you are no longer trying to match others. You are trying to fulfill your own assignment. Clarity brings order to chaos. Life will always present complexity, but clarity allows you to navigate complexity without losing focus. It doesn't remove challenges, it gives you a framework to interpret them. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by possibilities, you begin to prioritize what aligns with your direction and ignore what does not serve it. When purpose is understood deeply, discipline stops being a struggle and becomes identity. You are no longer forcing yourself to act correctly, you are acting consistently with who you have decided to become. That internal alignment is where transformation begins to stabilize and where scattered energy finally becomes focused. Power, responsibility is the doorway to personal power and growth, because as long as a person keeps shifting blame outward, they remain mentally trapped in a position of dependence. Blame feels comfortable in the moment because it removes pressure from the self, but in reality, it removes power as well. Every time responsibility is avoided, control over life is also surrendered. A person cannot change what they refuse to own, and what is not owned will always remain unchanged. Taking responsibility is not about accepting fault for everything that has happened. It is about accepting authority over what happens next. There is a difference between what you experience and what you choose to do with that experience. Many people confuse their history with their identity, but history explains the past. It does not define the future. Responsibility begins when a person separates what happened to them from what they decide to become. Blame keeps people emotionally stuck. It creates a cycle where energy is spent analyzing who is wrong instead of building what is right. While blame feels justified, it produces no progress. It may explain pain, but it cannot produce change. Responsibility, however, converts pain into direction. It forces a shift from reaction to creation. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" responsibility asks, "What can I do with what I have now?" Growth always begins at the point where excuses end. Excuses are subtle forms of self-sabotage because they protect comfort at the cost of progress. A person can either protect their ego or develop their life, but they cannot fully do both. Responsibility requires humility, the willingness to admit that regardless of circumstances, there is still something within one's control that can be improved, adjusted, or developed. When responsibility is embraced, excuses lose influence. The mind begins to shift from external dependency to internal authority. Instead of waiting for better conditions, better timing, or better people, action begins with available resources. This shift is powerful because it breaks the illusion that change depends on external permission. Responsibility reveals that progress is always accessible through choices, even in limited conditions. Ownership of decisions is a critical part of responsibility. Every decision produces outcomes, and every outcome becomes a lesson or a limitation depending on how it is interpreted. When individuals refuse to own their decisions, they also refuse to learn from them. But when responsibility is accepted, even mistakes become valuable because they transform into experience. Experience is not what happens. It is what is understood from what happens. Responsibility also changes emotional strength. People who blame others remain emotionally fragile because their stability depends on external behavior. But those who take responsibility develop resilience because their stability is internal. They are no longer easily shaken by circumstances because they understand their ability to respond is always present, regardless of situation. Without responsibility, potential remains dormant. Many people have ability but never activate it because they are waiting for external change. Responsibility removes waiting. It creates urgency without panic, action without hesitation, and movement without dependence. It forces a person to engage with life directly, instead of observing it from a distance. Accountability to self is one of the highest forms of discipline. When a person becomes accountable internally, external enforcement becomes unnecessary. They no longer need constant correction because they have chosen to evaluate themselves honestly. This internal accountability builds integrity, where actions align with intentions even when no one is watching. Responsibility also reshapes identity. A person who constantly blames others begins to see themselves as powerless, while a person who takes responsibility begins to see themselves as capable. Identity follows behavior. Over time, repeated ownership of actions builds confidence because it reinforces the belief that outcomes are influenced by choices. When responsibility becomes a lifestyle, excuses naturally disappear. Problems are no longer endpoints but starting points for solutions. Challenges are no longer threats but opportunities to demonstrate capacity. The mind shifts from asking who is responsible for this situation to how can I respond to this situation effectively. And in that shift, daily habits shape destiny more than occasional motivation, because motivation is temporary energy, while habits are repeated identity. Many people depend on motivation to change their lives, but motivation is unstable. It rises and falls based on emotion, environment, and external stimulation. Habits, however, operate quietly and consistently, shaping outcomes even when motivation is absent. A person's future is not built in moments of inspiration, but in the repetition of small daily actions that gradually define who they become. Every habit is a vote for the type of person you are becoming. What you repeatedly do becomes what you repeatedly are. This is why small actions, when repeated consistently, carry more power than large actions performed occasionally. A single day of discipline does not create transformation, but a pattern of disciplined days does. The repetition of behavior becomes identity, and identity eventually becomes destiny. Many people underestimate the power of consistency because results are not immediate. They expect visible change without invisible effort. But life responds to patterns, not wishes. The unseen discipline, practiced daily, eventually produces visible results that appear sudden to others, but are actually the outcome of long-term repetition. What looks like overnight success is usually the product of unnoticed consistency. Habits operate beyond emotion. Motivation requires feeling, but habits function regardless of how a person feels. This is why discipline is so powerful. It removes the need for constant emotional approval before action. A person controlled by emotion will always struggle with inconsistency, but a person guided by habit gains stability. Stability is what creates long-term progress because it ensures that action continues even when enthusiasm fades. The human mind is designed to automate repeated behavior. Once something becomes habitual, it requires less conscious effort. This means that habits can either work for you or against you, depending on what is repeated. Positive habits reduce resistance over time, while negative habits increase limitation without notice. Most people are not stuck because of major failures, but because of small, repeated patterns that gradually shape their life in a limiting direction. Transformation is not about doing more. It is about doing the right things repeatedly. A small, correct habit practiced daily will eventually outperform intense but inconsistent effort. The difference between success and stagnation is often not talent or opportunity, but repetition. The person who practices consistency in small areas builds a foundation that eventually supports larger achievements. Habits also define identity more than intentions. Intentions are what a person hopes to do, but habits are what a person actually does. Many people have good intentions but poor execution because intention alone does not override established behavior patterns. Identity changes when behavior changes, and behavior changes when habits are intentionally designed and maintained. Daily habits also shape mindset. The way a person starts their day influences their mental direction. The information they consume, the thoughts they reinforce, and the actions they take in the first hours of the day set the tone for everything that follows. Over time, these repeated patterns build either clarity or confusion, strength or weakness, focus or distraction. Discipline in daily habits creates self-trust. Every time a person follows through on a small commitment, they strengthen their trust in themselves. This self-trust becomes the foundation for larger commitments. Without it, confidence remains unstable. With it, confidence becomes natural because it is built on evidence, not assumption. Habits also reduce decision fatigue. When actions are structured through repetition, the mind no longer wastes energy deciding what to do next. This frees mental capacity for higher-level thinking and more important decisions. Without habits, every day becomes a negotiation. With habits, life becomes a system. Even identity transformation is rooted in habits. A person does not change who they are by declaring it once, but by living differently repeatedly until the new behavior becomes natural. Over time, the repeated action reshapes self-perception. The mind begins to accept the new pattern as identity because it has been reinforced consistently. What is done daily eventually becomes unavoidable reality. The accumulation of small actions creates momentum, and that momentum determines direction. Whether a person moves forward or remains stuck is rarely decided in a single moment, but in the quiet repetition of daily choices that gradually build the architecture of their life. Personal power is fully activated. Guard your mind. Every voice you allow influences your future, because the mind is not an empty space. It is a living environment that constantly absorbs, processes, and reproduces whatever is repeatedly fed into it. Every thought you think is not independent, it is shaped by input. Every belief you hold has been influenced by voices, experiences, conversations, media, and environments that you have allowed access to your inner world. This is why mental protection is not optional. It is essential for direction, stability, and transformation. The mind is like a gate. Whatever is allowed to pass through that gate eventually becomes part of your internal reality. If you allow fear-based voices, fear will grow. If you allow doubt-driven narratives, hesitation will increase. If you allow limiting opinions to dominate your thinking, your potential will shrink without you even realizing it. Most limitations are not created externally, they are accepted internally through repeated exposure to destructive input. Every voice carries influence, but not every voice deserves authority. There is a difference between hearing something and allowing it to shape your identity. Many people confuse exposure with acceptance. Just because an idea is heard does not mean it must be believed. But when the mind is unguarded, repeated exposure slowly transforms into internal agreement. What begins as external opinion eventually becomes internal belief. Guarding the mind requires discernment. Discernment is the ability to identify what strengthens you and what weakens you. Not every conversation is constructive, not every influence is helpful, and not every opinion deserves space in your thinking. Without discernment, the mind becomes a storage space for confusion. With discernment, the mind becomes a filter that protects direction and preserves clarity. Influence is subtle. It does not always arrive as direct instruction. Often it comes as repetition. The more frequently a message is heard, the more normal it begins to feel. Normalization is powerful because it removes resistance. What once seemed unacceptable can become acceptable simply through repeated exposure. This is how environments shape behavior without force. This is how external voices slowly reshape internal belief systems. Your future is directly connected to what you consistently listen to. If your environment constantly reinforces limitation, your expectations will shrink. If your environment reinforces possibility, your thinking will expand. This is why mental discipline is necessary. You cannot control every external voice, but you can control which voices you give permission to influence your direction. Guarding the mind also means being selective with attention. Attention is the currency of mental life. Whatever receives attention grows in influence. When attention is repeatedly given to negativity, comparison, or fear, those patterns become dominant in thought life. But when attention is directed toward growth, clarity, and purpose, the mind begins to reorganize itself around those themes. Silence is also a form of protection. In silence, external noise loses its dominance and internal awareness increases. Many people are mentally overwhelmed not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack silence. Without moments of reflection, external voices become louder than internal conviction. Silence restores balance by allowing truth to be separated from noise. The mind must also be trained to question input rather than absorb it blindly. Not every statement is truth, and not every opinion is wisdom. When the mind becomes passive, it becomes vulnerable. But when it becomes active and reflective, it becomes protected. Questioning input creates distance between influence and identity, preventing automatic acceptance of limiting ideas. Mental protection is directly connected to future direction. What you consistently allow into your thinking today becomes the foundation of your decisions tomorrow. Decisions repeated over time become habits, and habits shape destiny. This means that every unfiltered voice eventually contributes to the architecture of your life. Guarding the mind is not about isolation. It is about intentional selection. It is about choosing what aligns with growth and rejecting what distorts clarity. The strongest minds are not those that hear the least, but those that filter the most. Over time, this discipline builds mental strength, emotional stability, and a clearer sense of direction that is not easily influenced by external pressure. Transformation is not a single decision, but a continuous alignment of mindset, purpose, responsibility, habits, and mental discipline. A person does not change their life by one moment of inspiration, but by the consistent renewal of how they think, how they choose, and how they respond to life. Everything begins in the mind, but it is proven through action repeated over time. When the mind is renewed, limitations begin to lose authority. When purpose becomes clear, confusion begins to dissolve. When responsibility is accepted, personal power is restored. When daily habits are disciplined, direction becomes stable. And when the mind is guarded, external noise no longer controls internal identity. Each principle works together, not separately, forming a complete system of transformation. A life of growth is never built by chance. It is built by awareness, followed by choice, followed by repetition. What a person repeatedly thinks, repeatedly does, and repeatedly allows into their mind eventually becomes their reality. Nothing in life remains neutral. Everything either builds or breaks direction. True transformation is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming aligned with what was always possible within you. It is the removal of confusion, the strengthening of discipline, and the steady commitment to live with intention instead of reaction. Over time, what once required effort becomes identity, and what once felt difficult becomes natural. A transformed life is the result of a transformed inner world, where thinking is disciplined, choices are intentional, and direction is no longer questioned but lived consistently.